Good morning, all. A very welcome for those that are in the UK. Thank you for taking time out this morning to join Benil and George and myself for the webinar on cloud native disaster recovery with Azure. We're going to take you through to about 12 o'clock today. At the start, we're going to frame up the market as we see it. We're going to talk you through some of the models that we are seeing hit the market right now. We're going to talk you through Azure specifically, and then we're going to finish around how Microland are taking these solutions to market and how we think we could help you with your disaster recovery plans and strategies. We're going to finish with some Q&A at the end, some general housekeeping. Your audio will be switched off for the duration of this webinar. Please do ask questions on the chat box. They will be then forwarded through to myself to ask the team at the end. And at the end, there will be a 5-minute survey. And for those that are able to take that survey, it's very short, it's very simple. Your names will be put in the hat for a free DR workshop and design assessment, which would normally be a chargeable activity, but we're trying to use this as some way of onward dialogue, should we say, with you guys. So again, thank you for joining. So my name's Mark Riddy. I'm one of the sales leaders at Microland in the UK. I'm joined here by Benil George and George Wood. George being from Microsoft, Benil being our practice lead from Microland in this space. Again, thank you for taking your time out. I can get this to work. Right, so the agenda is as follows. I'm going to hand over to Benil in a few moments' time to talk through the changing landscape, and I'm sure that you could all agree, certainly in recent times, this topic has never been more relevant. Some of the challenges in setting up and running effective RD solutions and how that then feeds into the need during a digital era. I think, as I said before, we're then going to finish off talking about Azure specifically, i.e. ASR, and how Microland can help bring that to life in a real environment. But I think just to set the scene, back in 2017, I think all are on this call will have either been part of or heard of or been impacted by WannaCry. I certainly saw many customers, very large customers, impacted. I think it cost the tune around about $4 billion worldwide and impacted hundreds of thousands of seats of users. We're now facing an even worse disaster in that of COVID, right? It's obviously put every one of our businesses under pressure to accelerate digitization. Cloud agenda has never been more relevant. And that user interface coming out of COVID, how customers and how businesses are reacting and how they are enabling their users and their customers via the use of IT, never been more important. As such, disaster recovery has never been more important because it underpins that. You know, the way in which we interact with customers and businesses alike has never been more dependent on the use of digital. Therefore, DR for us has never been more front and center. And because of that, we wanted to do this webinar today. And I think on that note, Benil, I'm going to hand over to you to take the panel and the customers through our view of the market as we see it today.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good morning, afternoon, evening to all who have logged in. So as we all know, there are a lot of statistics which talks about the reason for disasters and the impact to organizations. While there are many that you can see on your screen right now, I would like to draw your attention to around 3 key points. So one is that the increase in disasters in the recent years due to cyber attacks, the ransomware, Mark spoke about that, especially the ones that will want you to have multiple recovery points for you to go back in time. So that is one point. Second, to put the organization, these kind of attacks put organizations into a disaster state for a longer period of time than usual. This means the situation is not for a few hours. Hence, there should be a possibility of scaling to support more workloads and more users. Typically, disasters or disaster recovery solutions operate at a very low scale and for shorter durations. Third, without the right DR solution, 90% of the organizations would not survive a disaster. It is more so relevant in the digital era where IT and data are the backbone of businesses. So what does all these statistics tell us? So it tells us the importance of choosing the right solution model to support your disaster recovery, which is key. Yeah. Okay. So in today's webinar, we would like to take you through a slightly different aspect of DR, which is about solution models and an approach to making enterprises survive disaster better. We won't be discussing the usual aspects or ingredients that say, you should do proper DR planning, you should do a risk assessment, business impact analysis, define your RTOs and RPOs aligned to business needs, test your plans regularly, use a combination of resilient designs, backup, and recovery options, and the likes. So what we will be mainly talking about is solution models. And when we say a model, it is more than just the tooling or processes. It also spans into where you are hosting your DR infra, who's managing it, the amount of automation that you have, the ability to scale, and of course, the cost at which you are achieving all these. So let us look at various solution models that has been used by organization over the years. Many of them continue to use these models with varying degrees of success. Of course, success is very subjective. So if you look at the three models which are very prevalent, one is self-hosted, the next one is co-location hosted, and the third one is cloud hosted. So there are various disadvantages and advantages for these kind of models. So let us have a look at that. So if you look at the self-hosted ones, these are typically for large enterprises who can invest heavy amount of investments into setting up their own DR centers and then set up the solution and manage it typically by themselves or an organization to which they have handed over the management. Typically a dedicated solution. And because of that and the costs involved, you can say that what they could bring it under the DR coverage is very limited. And the problem with these kind of solutions is that it has very limited scalability. In case of a disaster, and if it goes for more than a day or two or maybe 10, then what you have is that you have more and more people to be logged into the disaster recovery centers to work on your DR workloads, and you cannot scale. Now look at co-location hosted. It is again, since it is a shared environment, they typically have over-provisioned infrastructures, and they go by saying that, okay, not two of their clients would have the DR situation at the same time. They are able to provide it in limited investments. But the coverage is still limited, right? I mean, still there are costs involved in it, and you have to pay a minimum amount to them for them to actually run the disaster recovery infrastructure for you. So it still has some amount of investment and limited coverage. And typically it is co-managed. Half of the portion up till the hypervisor or maybe the OS, which will be managed by the disaster recovery provider, and the rest potentially the applications and the databases and everything would be managed by the the customer themselves. And this has longer lock-in periods and limited scalability. Now let us look at the modern ones. So which is typically possible for any size customers, given that cloud is inherently pay-as-you-go model. And you have very low barrier of entry, and because of the low cost and the low barrier of entry, you can look at covering for most of your workloads, not just your tier 1 critical workloads. And you have both fully managed and automated models that you can get, because the automation inherently available from cloud is pretty high. And needless to say that it has unlimited scalability. And if you look at the lock-ins are limited. When I say lock-ins are limited, because it is cloud-based, and typically VMs are the ones that you're going for. You can even set up your recovery into another cloud if you want. But these are the most prevalent models that you have today. So let us quickly look at some of the complexities that we have in these models, and the kind of challenges that you have in setting up and managing the DR infrastructure. So one thing to note here is that if we are not really talking about a resilient architecture to handle disasters, which is used in modern applications, example distributed architectures or clusters and the likes, their challenges are a bit different. But if you look at it, even today, 70% of the enterprise critical workloads are not necessarily in these sort of architectures. Moreover, they're not very cost effective as well, and cannot be used for all kinds of your workloads. So more coverage is typically not possible, and especially when you have longer periods under disaster. So one of the things that you know is that in setting up the disaster infrastructure and the solution is pretty complex and time consuming. So why is it so? Because what you have is that you have disaster recovery hosting provided by one vendor, and you have the hypervisors on which you have your infrastructure running is from another vendor. You have your DR solution, which is actually enabling you to do your replication and recovery and everything is from maybe possibly another vendor. And then you have custom automation scripts and everything that you will bring in actually to make this entire solution work. That is pretty complex and challenging, right? What if you had a completely integrated platform or a hosting provider with the solution which is tightly integrated with the hosting platform and the automation that is tightly integrated into it? So that is something that is pretty challenging. Another thing that you have to look at is that the DR test centrals. They are pretty expensive, and many a time, since it takes a lot of time and energy and automation required for you to do that, many customers land up not testing that quite frequently, and that reduces your confidence. And keeping your RTOs and RPOs shorter and ensuring that it will work during disaster cannot be achieved unless you test it frequently and test it thoroughly. Another thing is that limited failover automation. Like I said, if you have to actually automate your failovers, you need to have the automation tightly integrated into your platform. If you want to sequence out your automation of your recovery, DNS changes, and various other aspects that you would do post failover, and even to do the checking post failover before you can actually divert the traffic into the failover infrastructure. So these are some of the challenges that you would face in a traditional disaster recovery models that you have. So why should you actually look at your disaster recovery solutions on cloud? So this is the most important question of the topic today of the webinar. So why should my DR be on cloud? So let me look at a few aspects. So number one, lower costs. But how? So like I said, the pay-as-you-go and the just-in-time capability of cloud inherently provides you that capability to keep your cost lower. You don't need to pay till something is being used. And we also know about the lower storage costs on hyperscale clouds, isn't it? So this means that you can cover more apps for the same budget. So that is the primary thing. Number two, guaranteed availability of your DR infrastructure. So if you look at cloud, when all these providers provide you with infrastructure on which you are running your workloads for DR, it is important that somebody has to take care of the infrastructure availability. In the beginning that we looked at, there is a lot of issues that disasters are because of power failures, or cable failures and various other things. Today, we know that hyperscale cloud providers does not have that issue at all. Typically, you have a highly guaranteed availability of your disaster infrastructure, and which can be scaled for prolonged periods. So cloud inherently provides that. Third thing, automation. Now this is critical. So DR tests and drifts are expensive, like I said, and so the degree to which you can automate these on cloud is pretty high. The tools that natively integrate with the cloud fabric and the services are key, including automated runbooks, your DNS changes, traffic redirections, sequencing of VMs, checking. So all those things can be automated, and this is something that can be really well done using a cloud native solution. Number four, so you largely focus on app and data, than maintaining the underlying DR infrastructure or the orchestration solution. That's a lot of savings. So that's why we call this as a modern approach to disaster recovery. Just a moment. Yeah. So now that we have a clear understanding of the challenges and the need for cloud-based DR solutions and how it helps, let us look at what one of the most trusted cloud, which is Azure, has to offer, which has the most comprehensive DR solutions and the only cloud with true cloud native, fully integrated DR service, which is ASR. So let me hand over the session over to George, who's the cloud solutions architect from Microsoft. George, over to you.
Thank you so much, Benil. So good morning, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much to Microland for having me here today, and welcome to everybody on the call. So we've already been through some of the challenges and the ways that the cloud can help you mitigate some of these challenges. And here at Microsoft, we classify these challenges in three core ways. We've got cost, complexity, and compliance. I won't dwell on these for too long, but there is one that I did want to cover in just a little bit more detail, and that's the compliance section. So it's really important to make sure that you've got access and control over the data. This also means that you've got to make sure that you've got access to that data and are able to provide access to that data even during a disaster. So Azure provides peace of mind knowing that your workloads are protected from any disaster without having to build and maintain a secondary data center. Azure delivers cloud services that extend your data center and protect your infrastructure, transforming your business with a true hybrid solution. So Azure can help reducing the challenges of the cost, complexity, while helping add coverage and compliance. So we can drill into a bit more detail now. So if we take a look at how we reduce cost, and this is part of the inherent value of the cloud, of actually just being able to pay for what you use. So while your virtual machines aren't spun up in the cloud, you don't need to pay for that compute. So you don't have to pay for any of that ongoing infrastructure, or to power, or to run, or call the machines, or the IT personnel to actually manage those machines, saving you from effectively maintaining a secondary data center. Now, in terms of complexity, you can leverage all of the benefits of automation to enable the true power of disaster recovery plans and allow you to fail over your workloads with the click of a button, removing a lot of the work and stress involved with a disaster. Now, this actually enables you to focus on the delivery of the workloads rather than maintaining and setting up that infrastructure. The nice thing about this as well is with the automation plans, you're actually able to recover specific parts of your infrastructure at a time. So if you know that you might just need to burst your core workloads into Azure while you sort of recover that failure, you absolutely can just recover those initial workloads before deploying the rest of them. And that's all part of that automation when it comes to those recovery plans. Now, in terms of compliance, so Azure Site Recovery can help ensure that your data is available even with regional outages. You're no longer constrained by geographical barriers. The disaster recovery site can be from any one of our Azure regions around the world. And I think from the last time I checked, I think we had around 54 of those regions. So there are loads of locations depending on where you are in the world, just to meet all of your compliancy standards as well. So one thing to sort of note when we're talking about business continuity and disaster recovery, or BCDR, is that you actually need all three of these scenarios that you can see on the slide. So you need high availability, disaster recovery, and backup as well. So high availability is when you've got immediate failover within the same site. So this should be protecting against things like hardware failures. So if you had an SSD or a drive in your server that went offline, you should still be able to run that application. It shouldn't matter. It should be protected against that. Now, disaster recovery is when you have catastrophic failure on that initial site, and you actually need to run those workloads in a completely different location. And that's what we've been talking about today. Is traditionally you might have had a secondary data center, you might have had a co-location or something like that. And with Azure, you're actually able to leverage the cloud as your secondary data center. And then finally, and one that I think sort of a lot of people miss out sometimes when talking about disaster recovery and business continuity, is backup. Now, you may think, hey, if I've got high availability and disaster recovery, why do I also need backup? But the thing with disaster recovery is it's generally a fairly live failover. So you're trying to get a really recent point that you can actually fail over to, right? You don't want your data to be 3 or 4 weeks out of date. You want that data to be relatively live. Whereas backup, that's the point in time recovery. So there's a real difference. Backup is being able to restore to a backup point that was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, if you needed to take a look at that data in that state. So it's really important to have a combination of all of these three to create your true BCDR solution. So let's take a look at Azure Site Recovery in a little bit more depth. So we can see here, this is a pretty good overview of what Azure Site Recovery is. It pretty much covers all of the different points and different aspects of Azure Site Recovery. So Azure Site Recovery can actually fail over your on-premises virtual machines, whether they're Hyper-V or VMware-based virtual machines. It doesn't really matter what your hypervisor is, and it can actually also recover physical machines. So if you've not gone through that virtualization stage yet, you can actually still use Azure Site Recovery for that. Now, if you already have your workloads in Azure, no problem at all. You probably still do actually need to protect those workloads with Azure Site Recovery, right? They should still be available in that secondary region. So you can absolutely use this tool to actually fail over your Azure-based virtual machines. Now, if you don't want to leverage the Azure cloud, but you kind of like the sound of this technology, and I've got to say this is a scenario that I don't see all that often out there, but you can actually use Azure Site Recovery to actually orchestrate your, I guess, your disaster recovery between two physical sites. So if you wanted to use that sort of the replication and the orchestration technology, but you actually just wanted to maybe utilize the capacity you've already got in a secondary data center, you can absolutely use Azure Site Recovery to do that. So there's virtual machine level replication, low RTO and RPO times, the ability to actually test the failovers with Azure Site Recovery at a push of a button. That's pretty amazing. I would always recommend your site recovery plans or disaster recovery plans to be tested at least twice a year. So just being able to do that with a push of a button is amazing. The ability to fail back as well is a really important piece of functionality, right? Once you've failed over, you've rescued your primary sites, you've got all of your machines back up and running. How do you actually then take that, everything that's on the cloud, and bring it back down on premises? That is also a supported workload or a supported service here. And something also quite interesting about Azure Site Recovery, and in my experience, we've seen a lot of people use this actually as a bit of a migration tool, because if you think about it, you're actually taking that workload, pushing it up to Azure. Sometimes there's less than 5 minutes worth of latency between the states of what's on premises and what's in Azure. So then being able to switch over to that cloud workload once you've tested everything will work, actually allows you to use this within a migration scenario. And also testing different workloads. So there are a number of reasons why you'd want to use this technology, alongside obviously the core benefit of it being a disaster recovery solution. So finally, we've got a slightly more complex architectural diagram here, and this kind of shows that we can really leverage Azure Site Recovery from pretty much anywhere into the Azure platform. Also shows that there will be some times where you need a processing server or configuration server just to support basically the Azure Site Recovery service, and also show some of the connectivity to Azure. So I won't dwell on this architecture for too long, but if there are any questions about it, I'd absolutely be happy to take those offline. So for me, a really important part of understanding your disaster recovery strategy is actually understanding your current environment. Now, one of my old colleagues used to say, if you're going from point A to point B, it's a really good idea to know where point A is to begin with. And this is what the Azure Site Recovery Deployment Planner does. And so what it does is it basically scans your existing environment, whether that's a Hyper-V environment, whether that's a VMware environment, and it can actually give you some sizing guidelines for once you've moved into Azure, once your workloads are running in Azure. So this can give you a really great idea in terms of cost, can give you an idea of what your RPO and RCO times are going to be, and can also, and for me, one of the biggest benefits here is it can actually tell you which of your virtual machines are compatible and aren't compatible to be moved into the platform. So if there are any updates that you need to do, any changes that you need to do to that infrastructure to make them more compatible, then this is a really fantastic tool. If you've used Azure Migrate previously, which is another Azure service, this is very much in sort of it's a similar technology. I would say this is probably a bit more directed towards your sort of your disaster recovery sort of scenarios. So for me, this is a really important tool to be using to number one, understand which workloads can go up to Azure, what changes you might need to make, what's going to be required in Azure, if you're going to need any additional on-premises infrastructure, such as those sort of configuration servers, and it can also give you a really good idea of what you should expect from an RTO and an RPO perspective. So finally, I'd like to leave you with some best practices, and these are some fantastic links to read through in your own time. The documentation is always plentiful, but for me, my biggest recommendation is actually just to get started with this technology, see how it would work with your environments, do a test failover, and really get to understand the ins and outs of the technology. So now Benil will take you through our gold partner, Microland's disaster recovery as a service, that is built on top of Azure Site Recovery with robust processes and automation to provide a modern in-time recovery for your business critical workloads.
Okay, thank you, George. Thank you for that introduction to ASR, which to me is the only, I would say, fully integrated recovery solution available on any of the clouds that I have worked with. It's just so tightly integrated into the whole overall Azure, platform itself, and which has the capability to have your monitoring, your automation using Azure Automation, and obviously the solution by itself. You have Azure Backup. You have all these things coming together to actually enable you to provide true disaster recovery. Thank you for that. So allow me to start with an introduction to Microland. So Microland is actually a 31-year-old global IT services company headquartered in India with digital hubs and delivery centers in North America, UK, Europe, Middle East, Australia, Singapore, and of course our home country, India. We are 4,000 plus strong, highly focused and specialized team of talent on modern technologies and transformational services. Our services and innovative solutions leverage the digital elements of cloud, mobile, IoT, and data, and all these enabled and enhanced by AI, machine learning, based analytics and automation solutions. And we drive mainly three key values for our customers: profitability, user experience, and agility. Let me also give you a quick look into our service portfolio for our digital enterprises. So we have mainly 4 different solution areas that we focus, which is networks or the modern networks, which also has the security aspect of it. So the modern networks covers networks and security. The modern data, which covers both data center, cloud, and applications as well. And we have modern factory, which is nothing but the factory of the future, which enables something we call the industrial IoT, IIoT. So we have a solution area which is focusing around that, and the modern workplace. So these are the 4 areas we as an organization is helping enterprises with. And the service that we are going to take a deeper look is our DRaaS, or the disaster recovery as a service, which is actually a fully managed cloud native modern approach to guaranteed and in-time recovery. Oops. Okay, so let me start with a few highlights of our DRaaS service. So our DRaaS, or the disaster recovery as a service, is a fully managed and all-inclusive service. I'll tell you why we call it as a fully managed service in a while. So it runs on and uses the services and tools available natively from Azure, which is not just ASR. So ASR is the core component, but we obviously use Azure Monitor. We use we use Azure Automation. We use a lot of Azure services to actually enable you to actually provide this cloud native disaster recovery solution, and which is on the most trusted and comprehensive DR solution that is available with ASR, like I said sometime back. So what we additionally add is through innovative automation for DR testing, compliance, SOP and runbook for failovers, we provide better and greater RTOs and RPOs. And as we use ASR, we support almost all popular OSs and most apps because it uses a block level replication, and hence we are able to support almost all kinds of workloads. And we also have a good list of application awareness and a long list of rich automation library that provides production ready application specific scripts that can be incorporated into the recovery plans. And obviously we support on-prem to cloud and cloud to cloud, all to Azure. We also have this fully automated recovery drills and compliance checks, and which can also provide self-service to customers. Instead of calling up someone to help with a simple disaster recovery test, you can do it by yourself. Okay, so let us look at how we go about helping our customers with the service which we have built on top of Azure with custom automation. So sometime, like I said, that I will explain why we call it as a fully managed service. The reason why we call it as a fully managed service is that we help our customers through the entire life cycle of DR, not just by providing point solutions or the hosting services, or say only design and implementation services, or only the management part. It is the whole 9 yards to keep your workloads protected and recover them in time when needed. And also it is SLA backed. So that's very critical. So how do we start? Like George was mentioning, it is important to know where you stand today. So we start with an assessment of your business requirements, understand what sort of a recovery you already have, what costs you are incurring today, understand that, and also help customers define the right DR policies. Here we are not talking about doing a risk assessment and business impact analysis and say high level decision making whether we should have DR or not. I'm sure that most of the enterprises have already figured out all this sort of stuff. They have done their RA and BIA. That's a different thing. But where most organizations struggle is to implement them technically into the chosen solution. So we are talking about more ground level, making the business decisions happen sort of a thing here. So that is what we talk about: defining the policy, defining the RTOs and RPOs, fine tune them with the solution that you have, how you can automate and make them better. Look at all those aspects. Then we move on to helping setting up the DR solutions for the customer. And the key aspect that you have to note here is the SOP automation part, and also making DR tests and all those aspects into a self-service scenario wherein the customer, if they want to do that by themselves, not relying on say Microland, they can do it by themselves. So that is a key aspect where setting up and designing the disaster recovery on cloud is something that we anyway do. Next on is ongoing management. So the replication and testing the DR and aspects like that. So while we will do regular DR testing, some customers would want to do actual DR drills, so we help them do that as well. But the key aspect, what we have seen is that many a times there are changes that's happening in the source environment or to your overall architectures, and the SOP automation, SOP and the associated automation does not get updated. So that is one thing that we keep track and ensure that we are part of the change board and find out what is changing and ensure that the SOP and the automation associated with that is actually reflecting the changes that has been made, so that you can be sure that your disaster recovery solution is going to work when there is a need. Of course, the last is the recovery and failback. So recovery and failback, during the recovery, what you actually need is dedicated and responsive support for recovery to your DR infra. So going back to the right RPO, how to choose that, what are the point in time recoveries available for you, making all those choices and helping you do that. That is something that is part of the service. Of course, the monitoring and maintaining of them till things get back to normal is also part of the service. Failing back, and typically failing back is not something that is so easily automatable. So we, that we'll have dedicated support available for our customers to take you through that. So like I mentioned earlier, why we say that our service is all about guaranteed and in-time recovery it is also because of the processes and the managed service rigor that we put in place for this. So this is not, like I said, it is not just a one-time deployment and forgetting or just looking at replication, but it is about a fully managed service. So we provide service levels on various key aspects, which gets reviewed on a weekly, monthly, and a quarterly basis to ensure that the disaster recovery solution that is implemented and the service that is being delivered is guaranteed. Moreover, it is not just about SLAs, but we also have defined KPIs that pushes us to improve on an ongoing basis to deliver what we commit and beyond. So we look at some of the key performance indicators out there. Percentage of automated post failover system testing. Typically, everybody does automated testing, but that is only for the DR drills or DR testing. But once you fail over, you need to make certain checks before you can actually divert traffic into the failed over environment. So there are umpteen number of checks that one should do before you can actually, because you're going to transfer the live traffic onto that system and transactions are going to happen. So you have to ensure that basic checks are done. So that is something which will take a longer time for actually, and it will impact your RTOs in the real scenario. So that is something that nobody typically automates. We look at automating that one. Automation of your compliance reporting. It is very important that you have your compliance reports ready for your audits, and automating of them and to be made available is another thing. So there is no manipulation done, nothing. So it's all automated. Another aspect that if you look at it, reduction in replication and test failures. No solution is perfect, no service is perfect. You will have failures for many kinds of reasons. But the important point is how are you reducing those failures that you would observe during, testing of your disaster recovery environment or during replication. So we have all these KPIs that we put in place to ensure that we go beyond what we have committed. So with this, I want you all to go back and reflect or ponder on a few questions. First one, do I have the right DR model in place? Can I deliver more DR coverage to my business at the current DR cost? Have I automated my DR test to reduce human errors and DR failover SOPs to reduce my RTOs? Have I defined the right SLAs and KPIs for my DR services internally to my businesses? Do you measure some of these things that I've listed down here? So this leads to the most important question. How confident am I to provide guaranteed DR to my business? So with this, we reached the end of the webinar topics. So next on, what we'll have is we'll have a Q&A session moderated by Mark. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you, George. Thank you both for the last 40 odd minutes of very useful knowledge on this matter. I think it's fair to say, we're all going through an unprecedented change, and we're going to be for many months, if not years to come. Most, if not all, of our businesses are going to be taking a good look at how we've done things before, how we do things now, and how we're going to do things in the future. And when you look at disaster recovery as a topic, I think it's one of those areas, certainly, that customers that we've spoken to more recently are starting to go, look, do we want the headache of DR? Do we want to own the accountability for it? Digital is our main priority. Cyber is our main priority. We've got to stay on with those two. Do we really want DR as a headache, as it were, traditionally? And certainly this, and hopefully the solution overview that we've given you today, would show you that A, it'd be simple, B, we could be accountable, and C, it's on the best market-leading platform, Azure. So onwards to some questions. So there's a multitude of questions that have come through. I'm going to start with one aimed to you, George. So if I'm replicating to Azure, do we need to run virtual machines in Azure at all times?
So that's a fantastic question, and it's a relatively easy answer. And this is one of the benefits of actually leveraging Azure Site Recovery, is that you actually don't need to have those virtual machines spun up running all the time, so you don't pay for that compute. And effectively, that is one of the large benefits of leveraging a platform like Azure as your disaster recovery platform, is you're able to have the infrastructure that will deploy there, but you only pay for it when you need to.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, George. So one to you here, Benil. So how do I calculate the RTO for the DRAS service?
Okay, again, a brilliant question. So there are mainly three aspects to to actually this question. One is the time taken for the failed over VMs to be brought up in Azure in the target, as defined. Then the time taken to ensure the connectivity to the private IPs of the VMs, from within Azure, so that we know that these VMs are up and ready to serve the request. Then comes the third part, which is the access to the VMs on the public IP, which involves the time taken to reflect the changes to the DNS entries. Sometimes application level changes, needs to be done to make them ready. Time taken to complete the test, by the application teams or owners to ensure that the application is fully ready to serve the request. And a few other aspects which are not typically, may or may not be in my client control, depending upon whether we are managing those applications or databases or operating systems or not. So we calculate the RTO for our service based on the first two aspects for the purpose of SLA calculation. But however, in case if my client is managing not just the disaster recovery service, but end to end, because my client is not just company which provides disaster recovery as a service. We also do managed services, and because of that, if we are managing the rest of the stack, then even that is included in the RTO. Otherwise, typically it is ensuring that the VMs are failed over. They all are in the right sequence. They are ready to serve the request, from the private IP perspective.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Benil. One back to you, George. Would there be a cost associated that would be incurred on Azure to perform disaster recovery drills and test failovers?
So there's no specific cost for a test failover. However, if you do spin up a virtual machine in Azure, you will pay for that compute. So that's just something to be mindful of, is when you are testing those things, the test itself has no cost, but your actual, if you spin up a virtual machine and you leave it running there for 24 hours before you, bring it back down, you will pay for that compute and things like storage associated with that.
Brilliant. That's loud and clear. Back to you, Benil. So during the actual failover, what if I need to support from a database SME from my client to support our team? Would you provide that?
Okay, well, that's a very classic one. Even I have interacted with some of the DR providers wherein we were not managing the DR environment, but we were managing the live environment or the production environment. And the DR was provided by a third-party DR provider, the traditional DR providers. And there are times in which the customer wanted these support from the DR provider, because for us, my client, we did not have access to them. So apart from the DRAS services, my client provides Azure managed services as well. So if the DRAS customer has contracted my client for managing the Azure environment along with the database and various applications and things like that, then the database SME support is always available to the customer as part of our overall service offerings. However, if the customer has contracted my client only for the DRAS service and not for the database and applications and things like that, then we will have that availability of the database engineer on an on-call basis, and we'll try to fulfill the availability of the SME on a best effort basis. Given the fact that the databases could be different kinds of databases, and the database, the way it is being used would be different. But yes, since we also support databases and different kinds of databases, we will have them made available, so that the customers can use them on an on-call basis in an unscheduled manner. But it is pretty challenging, but we will try and fulfill that, like I said, on an additional on-call basis.
Okay, Benil, I've probably got two questions in one here to ask yourself. First of all, can you kindly repeat the questions that one should ask internally around the existing DR? I think you mentioned them before. If we could repeat those, that would be good. The other one, actually quite an interesting question. So would Microsoft and Microland also not have dependency on network service providers for DR automation drills, etc.? How would that be managed? Two questions in one for you there.
Okay, so I'll go one by one. Let me repeat all the questions that you should go back and reflect on. So first question, do I have the right DR model in place? And when I said model, I said it is not just about the tool that you're using, not just about the processes, not just about the tool that you're using, but the whole host of things, right? So whether you are hosting it in the right place or not, who's managing it for you? Is it fully managed? Do you have things like self-service for my testing? So if the entire model has to be looked at and say that, do I have the right model in place? And can I deliver more DR coverage to my business at the current DR cost? So that is the first question. Second, have I automated my DR test to reduce, say, human errors? Or have I automated my DR failover SOPs to reduce my RTOs? Like I said, where are all the areas that you can actually automate your DR failover tests? Third question is that, have I defined the right SLAs and KPIs for my DR services internally to my businesses? Because if you're not making that commitment internally to your businesses, it is very difficult for you to even improve or have a proper DR setup. And the last question is that, how confident am I to provide guaranteed DR to my business? So if the first three questions are not really great, the answers are not really great, then obviously your confidence level will be pretty low. So these are the four questions that you should go back and ask yourself against the DR solution and the model that you have. So that will help you improve that. So the next question, George, you said that what if there is a networks provider dependency for the automation drills, right?
Correct, yeah. So how would we guarantee that, based on the fact that we are obviously dependent on network service providers to deliver this service? How would we deal with that?
Okay, good question again. So that is another main reason for having your disaster recovery on cloud. So when you're setting up your disaster recovery on cloud, there are two aspects that we should look at in terms of connectivity to the cloud, right? One is, once it is failed over, are these applications to be accessed over public internet, obviously using SSLs and things like that? Or is it going to be accessed using, say, client-to-site VPNs, directly onto Azure, and then you start accessing your workloads? So that's the second aspect. Or the third one is that, are you still wanting to go through your corporate network and then access the workloads which have been failed over to Azure and then access them or not? In many cases, the third one will be difficult because you might have one of your hubs already down, and going to the corporate network would be slightly difficult. So if you look at that, once it is failed over onto Azure, now the dependency on a general network service provider would be comparatively less when it comes to automating them, except for if you have DNS hosted elsewhere. So in the best practices that we follow is that, if you're going to have DNS entries to be made to redirect your traffic and things like that, then you set up that on Azure and have that as a secondary DNS, so that that is available for you even when your network goes down. So in the whole solution will be designed in such a way that your dependency on network during failover is less. Now, there was another question that was during drills. Now, drills, like I said, there is drills and testing. Testing is a test failover, wherein typically you don't really change the traffic and go through the network provider traffic, but you would be checking whether the failed over, you do a test failover in ASR, then you check on the private IPs and see whether it's all working or not. You're not checking the traffic redirection. But when you're actually doing the drills, you might have traffic redirections needs to be done. The only thing that we could potentially not automate is blocking the traffic which is going to the on-premise, because it is still up and running. Because potentially some customers would bring that down, some customers won't want to bring that down, but only block the traffic which is going to those we work and coordinate with the ISPs which the customer works with and ensure that those traffics are redirected to Azure. So this is how we do it. Mostly less dependencies, and if there is a dependency which cannot be automated, we closely work with them to make that happen. That's a long answer, sorry.
No, it sounds very detailed, and it was a difficult question, and it was a very important one, so thank you for that. So back over to you, George. Does ASR support application consistent recovery, and if so, what apps does it support?
So that's a great question, and there are a couple of different ways to answer that. So it is application aware with some applications, and there's a great page on the documentation that basically tells you what workloads it will support to be in that sort of application aware state. But at the end of the day, you can actually just recover a whole virtual machine. So anything that's on that virtual machine will be replicated, basically. But it's then really important to make sure that you test the setup and do those test failovers to understand what actually happens to that application when you do go through that failover process. So we'll make sure that sort of when we send out the link to the video or to the webinar, that we also include the link to that sort of list of application aware applications that Microsoft supports.
Okay. And I think we're coming on to the last question, so if there are any more, please do send them on the panel as we go through this. This one's to you, Benil. I may need to test my DR setup multiple times due to regulator compliance needs. It's a good one. Does Microland's DR service support unscheduled DR testing, and what is the limit of number of scheduled DR testing as part of this service?
Okay, yeah, this is a typical one, because many customers, when you are doing a fully managed service, the question is that can I test my DR at will, or is it that you have only some scheduled ones or not? So there are two aspects to this. So Microland DRaaS service supports unlimited automated DR testing. So when we say DR testing, that means it is test failovers. So you do a test failover, you're still not redirecting the live traffic onto that one, but you failover and you actually do all the checks which needs to be done to ensure that the configure during the setup phase is actually working. So the customer will have access to run these test failovers, from the Azure console itself, and they can do that if they want to, or they can call one of our engineers, part of the DRaaS service, and request for doing that one. But it's typically automated self-service test which is available, which can be done in an unlimited manner. But there are customers who would need the actual DR testing, which we call it as drills, which is simulating an actual DR and actually failing over to the DR setup and shutting down the prod, or at least blocking the traffic which is going to prod. This will be supported as per agreed schedules and frequencies, where Microland SMEs will be available to support any needs during the actual failover, like it is like a real failover, right? So even though such a scenario, we will have it done like an actual DR scenario. So the ones which is DR drills or the actual failover, it is as per schedule, and it will be based on the number of times agreed as per the contract. But if it is self-service test failovers using Azure's ASR's console, it is unlimited and it will be automated.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So I think we've reached the end of the questions. There hasn't been any more come through on the live panel. I think we're going to wrap up probably a few minutes early by the sounds of it. So firstly, again, thank you for taking the last 55 minutes out of your diary and time to listen to what I believe has been a really informative session. Thank you, George, for joining us from Microsoft. Benil, thank you for facilitating the session today. For those that can take the quick survey at the end, again, we would love to engage in further dialogue. This is a topic that we are hugely passionate about. We think it's massively relevant. It's always relevant, but never has been more relevant. We'd love to have ongoing dialogue. We'd love to engage with you guys. We'd love to understand more about your views and opinions as well on this matter. But for now, we will close the session down. Thank you again for your time. Have a great day. Those that are in the UK, hopefully the weather will pick up soon, and we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank
who
you all.
joined in.
Cheers.